It's Friday, June 5th, 2015. I'm Jimmy Principe.
And I'm Trey Comstock. When your final orders, because this is Tech's Last Call, episode 117. Your last call for Tech News of the Week. Tonight, Jimmy has a summer merger with Windows 10. And I research Congress for their thoughts on security.
Terrifying.
We start tonight with a historic reversal. Thanks in no small part to Edward Snowden, this week marks the first time since 1978 the NSA has had its powers formally limited by Congress. In what may be the first and only time that I will make this particular statement, thanks to Rand Paul. Yep.
Specifically a filibuster by Rand Paul.
Filibuster by Rand Paul. Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which, among other things, allowed for the bulk collection of metadata, was allowed to expire. It was then replaced the next day by the USA Freedom Act. And now, if you thought Congress was being totally sensible, you haven't heard that USA Freedom Act is an acronym. Yes, it's an acronym that stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Fulfilling Rights and Ending Eavesdropping, Dragnet Dash Collection, and Online Monitoring Act. That spells USA Freedom.
Someone worked really hard at that.
Those interns are underpaid.
Yeah, and overworked.
So anyways, when it passed, that act passed the Senate with 67 votes. 67 votes in the Senate. It had passed the House twice, most recently not all that long ago. Obama has stated that he will sign this bill into law, and actually it was encouraging the Senate to pass it, even though it's kind of against what he actually wants. What this means, what's new in this act, is that it formally ends bulk collection of U.S. citizens' phone metadata. It is still being collected and stored, but now by your phone company, who was kind of storing it anyways. And the NSA has to file a specific request for a specific record rather than just getting all of the things. FISA can no longer go to Verizon and say, you have to give them all of it. FISA now has to go to Verizon and say, we want this specific record for this specific dude. That's a change.
A good change in this case.
It can still bulk collect for non-citizens, but if any citizen gets looped in that dragnet, those records have to be purged. So that's different as well. Also, the USA Freedom Act allows companies like Google and Facebook to actually report this when they get requests from the government for information. They no longer have to say we got between 1 and 999 requests. They can now say we got 147 requests. We got 3 requests. We got 1 request today. They're able to be more transparent about what's going on. In addition, there will be theoretically more oversight of the FISA courts, although having not read the exact text of the bill, I don't know exactly what that looks like. This does not end all the government surveillance programs targeted at U.S. citizens, but it marks a fundamental shift in how lawmakers approach national security in a post-9/11 world. Good job, Ed.
Yeah, I mean this is a big move, and Rand Paul, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of the things that he says and does, but this is I think he ended up on the right side of this one, filibustering, and a lot of people kind of took it as a much more political move than anything else, that he was just trying to do this to get FaceTime. Well, and by that I mean
Mitch McConnell and John McCain.
And Senator John McCain.
Both of whom wanted this thing to fail outright. So,
I mean,
the oldest piece of political rhetoric in the book is, oh, you're just doing that for your campaign. I think when it comes to this kind of stuff,
this is not in line with what his target demographic is, though, for the Republican nomination.
think he's going to win? Does he think he's going to win? Do the Pauls ever think they're going to win?
No, Ron Paul is very good at getting a lot of money and then finding stuff to spend it on.
Sure. He named his kid after Ayn Rand. Like, this is... Yeah. I think, look, this bill had 150 co-sponsors in the House and over 21 co-sponsors in the Senate. It's not just Rand Paul. Rand Paul did the filibuster that led to an actual stoppage in bulk metadata collection. Oddly enough, the USA Freedom Act brings back metadata collection, bulk metadata collection for a little while they wind down the program, which is funny because the program got shut off abruptly for a little while between Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, I really liked there was a political cartoon that was like the spy cameras with like a power cord coming off and just like unplugged from the wall.
Yeah. I mean, we don't get everything, but this kind of thing just doesn't happen. Congress has this is the first time since 1978, the Foreign Surveillance Act of 1978, that Congress has ever limited the power of the NSA. Especially since 9/11, we have been consistently increasing the abilities of the NSA and the security establishment, and this is the first time we've ever walked that back.
Well, and it's also like significant, like 67 votes. That's,
So theoretically, if you hold that, that's a veto-proof majority, right? Because they can just go back and reverse it. So it's one of those. Of course,
Obama
Obama's
goes, "We're not
it.
playing with fire on this one."
Of course, Obama's going to sign it. It's really embarrassing if your veto gets flipped, right? Right. The Senate doesn't agree on anything. They agreed to debate the issue was like 77 votes to whatever. 23 or whatever, but it was 77 votes in favor of bringing it to the floor to debate, which at that point Monday when I read that story was basically like, look, this means it's going to pass. And Rand Paul isn't totally thrilled about this. This still means there's surveillance. It's just better managed, slightly more constitutional looking surveillance.
Yeah, and slightly more transparent.
Well, I mean, this still comes back to you either trust the government, the logic we've had on this.
It always comes back to that.
Or you don't. Right.
Right. Well, and I had a conversation with Kate where she said, at the end of the day, there is no such thing as privacy. Was the answer that she came up to when we were kind of talking about this sort of stuff. She goes, "There's just no such thing as privacy, and any belief that there is somewhat naive. So once you move past thinking that you have privacy from the government or from foreign governments or from whoever on the internet, specifically on the internet,
Yeah.
The phone stuff is different. People have an expectation of privacy that a phone conversation.
But these aren't conversations. This is metadata. This is the who, the what, and the when.
Right.
Not the contents. This is, Jim, your number called this number at this time, which is how they got Osama
and the duration and the duration of the call was this.
Right. And that's how they got Osama bin Laden, was phone metadata. I mean, this is not your phone metadata specifically.
Not mine. I was not
in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But this is really useful information.
It helps with the web, so you can figure out the web of like contacts. So you can figure out who's contacting who. There's actually they use phone metadata in the movie Clear and Present Danger.
Interesting.
And that's how they figure out who this key hitman for the cartel is that they have this phone data that kind of matches with where they thought he was, and they finally get a recording of his voice, which they didn't have, and then they were able to figure out, okay, whatever. I mean, it's Tom Clancy, so.
Sure.
But anyways,
I mean, phone metadata, you think about it, actually can tell you quite a bit.
That was like pre-cell phone.
The example I always get is, if you call your ex-girlfriend's number 10 times in one night, the NSA can infer a lot about you from that phone metadata, right? Or if you're repeatedly, calling the STD clinic, again, like the NSA now can tell a lot about you.
Right.
Based on who you're calling. And because of the caller ID database, you get a lot of information out of that. So this is a significant return to privacy, and I think it's a little ridiculous to say that there isn't privacy. There should be.
I'm not disagreeing that there should be privacy.
Privacy is technically possible. No one does it. You can encrypt everything. You yourself can encrypt everything, right? Every communication you make, you can encrypt with PGP, and odds are that's going to stay private, right?
Yeah.
You, in volunteering or information to Facebook and to Google, those are the kind of the two biggest offenders of this, and to Microsoft, are giving up your privacy in exchange for these services. That's the actual exchange here. And what the government's been able to do, and is probably still able to do through PRISM, because keep in mind, PRISM's not gone. Mm-hmm. This is just the phone metadata thing. They still have, they're still intercepting undersea cables and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is just one thing that we've clawed back. This isn't over. But you give up your privacy when you give that all to Google or you give it all to Facebook. And then the government's saying, okay, we want that stuff too. That's really useful. And so the government's skimming it either through formal request or through hacking undersea cables. But I mean, both of those things are ongoing.
Right.
So it's not that there can't be privacy. It's not that privacy doesn't exist. It's that we are really into voluntarily giving up our privacy and then being really surprised when something goes wrong with that.
Well, and I mean, I always think of, and my brother and I actually had a conversation about this a few weeks back when I was visiting him for his graduation. We're talking about Facebook and how Facebook, when you installed the Facebook app, because I had an update to Facebook that came while I was there, you read through what it asks for permissions on, and it literally asks for permissions on every single thing that your phone can tell it.
Sure.
Like GPS, but all the way down to contacts and, is the camera on, and is, what other apps are running at the same time, and what browsing history you have. And it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And so at that point I was like, oh, wow, this is really it wants everything.
Yeah, it does.
From my phone. So I've now put a link to Facebook on my home screen, which does not solve the problem, but it reduces the amount of information Facebook can collect from me.
But you voluntarily told them what bands you like, what food you like, the places you go. I mean, you volunteer your social
Not me
web.
Specifically, but yes.
Sure you do. You volunteer your social web.
You
friend people on Facebook, yeah?
Well, but not at the same level that other people do.
Sure.
And so there is information that Facebook has on me as a result of things that I have volunteered. Right. However, they do not have nearly the data on me that they would have on definitely some of the people I went to college with, where Facebook is where they live their life.
Sure, yeah. Don't live your life on a 2D plane.
They check into things. They, always that's the only things I ever get checked into are when other people check me in.
Me too. Why
right, because I don't care. But people don't even think about the privacy implications of all of that. And then you think back to the Twitter stuff where people were tweeting when they were out of town and then getting robbed. And then they made a movie about it,
But again, my issue isn't necessarily Facebook specifically.
You bought into the basic premise.
Basic premise of Facebook, and they make money off you. This is a transaction, and whether you realize what's going on or not is entirely different. But look, Facebook's not evil; they're just a business, and if you get too mad at them, you'll leave. So on some level, they want to make it at least non-intrusive, and really all they're trying to do is sell you better ads, which some tech journalists keep trying to convince me is something I actually want.
Those are the ones that are actually selling ads on their sites.
Yeah, generally speaking. And yeah, you're not wrong about that. It's Mike Elgin, and so yeah, he is selling ads.
Talking about, I watched that show where they were talking about the ad blockers and how it's like this arms race between ad blockers and ad sites, and basically everyone on the show was like, I don't know, any ad blockers. I don't like them. I
They're
mean, I
literally stealing
understand.
food from our mouths.
I understand why people use them, but I really don't like them. It's like, come on, just say what's up.
Well, I mean, so a lot of sites. This is way off topic, but a lot of sites, Twit included, are now doing inline advertising, which I'm not sure is better, right? Or
Right.
advertising is site content. This brought to you by, and so it's baked into, every Twitch
Well,
show
that's
has
the old
4 ad
radio
breaks.
model.
In the
That's
middle of
that's the
podcast.
radio model that Leo's bringing to Twit specifically.
Well,
But
it's not just Twitch. I mean, the Giant Bombcast functions that way. There's plenty. It's the turning into the model of ad-supported podcasts because you can't, with ad blocking, you need to build it in. I was some sort of media collaborative the other week, and I was talking about this that you have to. Whatever engagement or whatever advertising you want, you need to bake that into your product. And when your product is essentially an internet radio show, you have to build it in line to the radio show. Like, this is 1930s, and this is brought to you by Dove Soap, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Where
that
you
was the
can't-
Camino. The Camino was brought to me by Dove Soap.
Right, but you know how it used to be. Like,
Yeah.
the baked-in advertising to the 1930s style radio shows is basically the model for podcasting. And you can pretend like it's an innovation all you want, but it's not. I mean, it is the model for radio, but you get and that's not even that, because they clearly identified it as an ad break. It's the true inline print advertising stuff where it's like pretends to be site content but is actually an ad and is poorly identified. That's
So
what's
okay,
crazy.
so what I like on that, now that we're way in the weeds, it's the way that CNET handles that is they don't do ads, they don't write things for people. However, what they will allow people to do is to pay to have the content that was written about them. So, for example, for a while there, Microsoft was paying for the Surface Pro 3 to be promoted,
Sure.
so it was still near
Now-
the top.
Okay, but there's a problem there, right? Did they write that review so it could get promoted? Right? So are they
But they gave it a 3.5 stars. I mean, like in general.
Would you follow my logic? I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily saying they did. But what that model leaves open is it
Right, well, and you
creates
have
this
to-
blurry line.
And that's the question you always have to ask. I mean, you have things where like T-Mobile is sponsoring whatever the most recent phone is that they have specifically on their network. They'll like, so for the Galaxy S6 for a while was the one that it said, promoted by T-Mobile, and then the T-Mobile ad, when you clicked on that, the T-Mobile ad would show on that page with the Galaxy S6 content. And so I mean they're being very clever with how they're handling the ads to try to contextualize as much of it as possible.
So okay, so but all of this is a long way of saying it's one thing for these companies to be doing that.
You're
try to better
giving-
target ads at you, right? I get what they're doing. It's the side effect of you volunteering all of this stuff is now the government can get it too, and what they're doing with it is entirely unclear. And the answer is probably not a whole lot. Right? I think they have.
Yeah,
they
you
have
should
a data
be
problem.
in a lot of cases you should be less concerned about what the government is doing with that information that you're volunteering. It's the information that you're not willingly volunteering I'm more worried about.
But what do you define as not willingly volunteering? You willingly volunteered it to Facebook or Gmail. The government's not unwillingly taking it from you.
Yeah, so the phone, the
Phone
metadata
metadata.
stuff, like
You
that.
shared that with your phone company. You voluntarily shared that with your phone company, right? That's the terms of access, right? They've got to know how the call goes because it's got to route through their network.
Right,
you
right.
voluntarily gave that information somewhere.
But
you
I'm
just
more
didn't
okay.
understand where it was going.
But I'm more okay now that the phone company, the person that I have the contract with, is the person that is keeping the information,
Which
and
that's
then
how they
the
bill
government.
you anyways.
And this is how it all works anyway. And then the government has to ask for it.
Right, I mean, this shows up on my bill, right? Call to X at X time, blah blah blah. And so,
Right.
if they can get a damn warrant, that's how our legal system
Right.
works, right? And a judge can decide if it's a reasonable search procedure, and
But
but that starts to look more like how they could break into my house too.
right, we should definitely, things that are publicly available you volunteered that information for the world to see. Yes, Facebook sees it. Yes, Google sees it. But anything that Facebook and Google has, at some point, if they have a request for that information, they'll have to give it up.
unless they encrypt it from themselves.
Right, which most of them do not, because
Well, they threatened to, and the government freaked out and wanted to weaken encryption and blah blah blah. But I mean,
right.
Google's flirted with the idea of just, well, yeah, I don't know, we can't see it either, and that's when it gets truly.
That's
scary.
Sergey that's doing that.
Well,
Sergey's
and
just like, screw
look,
you guys.
you can do it yourself now,
Yeah.
right? How do you think these leaks got out there in the first place?
Well, there's some great what, encryption, or
Encrypting things yourself.
and there was a great I mean, on Tom Merritt's show today, Darren Kitchen provided different encryptions for that you can do: full disk encryption or volume encryption. Some good free tools. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go check that out.
But it's not even. Yeah, it's
where I
more
was
the
getting
encrypted
with
communication stuff.
where I was getting with that was more of the. It's not the government in most cases that you need to be worried about. If you're a fine, upstanding citizen like most people, you the government is probably not your biggest concern. It's employers that you need to worry about with what you're putting on Facebook, because in colleges, employers, they're asking for Facebook as like, okay, you either need to friend us or you need to give us your login. I heard one where they were saying that you need to give us your login
Yeah.
in order to
That's
to
not
be
legal.
employed.
That's not legal.
Yeah, but they were still asking for it.
Sure.
There's lots of things that are not legal, and yet they still get asked.
So speaking of things that got asked, talk to me more about T-Mobile.
Yeah, so T-Mobile and Dish might be getting hitched. The Wall Street Journal this week reported that Dish and T-Mo are having a high-level discussions about a merger that would place Dish CEO Charlie Ergen as chairman and T-Mobile's CEO John Legere as
Crazy.
they're both crazy.
Actually, that's true. They're both crazy.
As the CEO of the new combined company. Now, so
Great.
this comes from our favorite people familiar with the matter. Those guys know everything. Now, the biggest advantage of this seems to me, at least, to be for T-Mobile, because Dish has just lots of spectrum, specifically in the 700 megahertz spectrum, which is the really high value spectrum. One article I was reading, I believe it was on VentureBeat, was calling it beachside real estate of spectrum, because the 700 megahertz spectrum is what penetrates buildings really well. It's one of the reasons that AT&T and Verizon, they have a lot of that spectrum, and so they're able to get really good building coverage, whereas Sprint and T-Mobile, they're great when you're outside, but the second that you step into a building or the second you step into an elevator, that call drops. And It's because they do not have – Sprint just has the most spectrum of anyone, but it's not really valuable spectrum, so they can't penetrate buildings and things like that. And so everyone's kind of waiting. Next year, there's going to be a 600 megahertz spectrum auction, and that should help.
The television white space auction.
Yeah, so that should help level the playing field a little bit if T-Mobile and Sprint can get in that. But it's sounding like this might be a different way for T-Mobile to get that spectrum. And Dish in the past, we know, has been interested in merging with Carrier. As we know, they also made a bid for Sprint when SoftBank was purchasing Sprint, and their bid wasn't quite enough, but they were an interested party, and they've been buying up a lot of spectrum such that people have said that maybe they're even going to start their own carrier and say, kind of screw you to everybody else.
Wouldn't that be great?
So although the Wall Street Journal has indicated that much of the details still need to be ironed out, like the purchase price and stock swap deals, and how that's all actually going to go down. This is not the first deal between a satellite company and a wireless carrier. That's AT&T, who's currently in the process of buying DirecTV to the tune of $48.5 billion.
So it's two first tier players merging and two secondary tier players merging.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Dish almost has to do. I mean, that's the whole point behind the Hoppa. And
look, the Dish, in terms of like corporate culture, right? Like Dish and T-Mobile are kind of the same thing, right? They're
Yeah.
both kind of like, screw you, existing model. We're going to do our own thing. You
Though-
want to record 6 shows at the same time? I've never figured out why, but let's say you wanted to record all of primetime television because you have the time for that. You can do it, and you can hop right over the commercials. T-Mobile's like, I don't care what existed before. You can make all these ridiculous cell phone plans. You can have a phone anytime you want. You're going to have to pay for it, like with real money. But, international, we got that covered. Yeah, they just, they're very similar.
John Laguerre going, yeah, I could just say, yeah, international texting, that's free because I don't have any. No one does it. So it's really easy for me to tell you it's free because it doesn't cost me anything.
I do a lot of international texting, actually.
So there's no comment from either of the companies at this time for obvious reasons. But Trey, do you think this is a logical combination of two crazy CEOs?
It's two companies in a similar situation that are about to be in an even more similar situation with the merger of AT&T and DirecTV, right? DirecTV is by far the bigger player. Dish has always had to be the punky upstart. And by the way, I'm a Dish subscriber, and I actually like the service.
Yeah, and I'm a T-Mobile subscriber, and I like the my choices as far the fact that I can like flip flop plan. So let's say this month I was going to use a lot of data. I could go ahead and say, you know what, this month I'm going to pay for the unlimited tier and just use all the data I wanted. And then next month I can go back down to my normal tier, and they'll just say, okay, that's fine. They don't really care. Yeah. And then actually Data Stash is awesome. I've actually used some of my Data Stash last month. It said, oh, by the way, you're using your Data Stash now. I said, oh, interesting.
No big deal. That's cool.
It was all the downloading of stuff of like apps and stuff I was doing in the airport right after I got the phone.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Because that was all on 4G.
Yeah.
The other thing I left out of here is that Verizon actually bought its own kind of like TV group.
Right. Yep. They did that.
I don't remember what it was called, but
So let's hit the brakes here for a second and go. At some point, this has got to get troubling, right? So Comcast and NBC are one company.
Mm-hmm.
DirecTV and AT&T are going to be one company. Dish and T-Mobile. We're just starting to blur the lines between how content gets created, how content gets out there. This is all really weird in terms of these kind of crossover media conglomerates. Now, luckily, unlike NBC Comcast,
I think NBC Comcast is the weirdest of those. I think that a satellite provider and a cell phone provider, they have very similar infrastructure needs. They both need wireless spectrum.
Yeah, no joke.
And so if Dish and T-Mobile are able to join forces and go after more spectrum in that way, or T-Mobile is able to use some of the spectrum Dish has, and Dish is able to use some of the spectrum T-Mobile has, there's a lot of opportunity there for both of them.
Yeah. I don't deny that this is good for the companies and not totally weird for consumers because it doesn't really decrease competition exactly because these aren't competitors merging. These are people in vaguely related market. This isn't like that time that Sirius and XM merged, right?
Where it was like, wait a second, but I thought they were competitors, right, like the only ones.
That time that Time Warner and Comcast tried to merge, and now Time Warner and Charter are trying to merge. That's actually eliminating competition from the field.
That's also was listed in the same story I was reading about this merger. They listed the Time Warner and the Charter Communications deal.
No, it's from one of the weeks we were dark, but it's big.
I think that was last week.
Yeah, it may have actually been last week.
It fell apart last. The T-Mobile or not T-Mobile, the Time Warner Comcast fell apart, and then the next day. So we got an announcement that wasn't happening, and then the next day we got an announcement that this other thing is happening.
What if I got a deal for you?
So I think that this could be really interesting for Dish if they can get some of their services onto T-Mobile's phones. But I don't.
But for most of their services, you have to be a Dish subscriber. So there could be like a simplified billing structure where it's like an everything plan for this company. Get your TV and your mobile broadband right here, and then one login to rule them all. Sure,
then,
but in the end, it's just, if you're not a Dish subscriber, their apps are good, but if you're not a Dish subscriber, it's just going to be crapware you can't use.
and I also wonder what this means for satellite internet.
Satellite internet's terrible.
Well, on both of these, but satellite internet's the option when you're where like the traditional networks don't cover.
Yeah, don't I know it?
So it's expensive, it's slow, but
Well, it's expensive. It's down isn't awful. It's up is terrible.
yeah, no, that's
I mean, the issue you get, you can get DSL-ish speeds down, but the up is
garbage.
it's just because the system's not designed for it. Satellite internet's a kludge, right? It's using satellite TV hardware, which is designed for a lot of down and a very little bit of up, like a very little bit or no up. And it's going, okay, now we need a pipeline up, and it's not right. It's kind of a last resort, and I mean it could mean just a strange bundling for, I don't know. There's also other non-Dish DirecTV competitors in that market.
But there's not a lot of them.
No, there's not. It's just not a good market. Speaking of not a good market, Windows 10 really, yeah.
It's a market.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be great, but they did not do a good job this week.
Yeah, no. So it's official. Microsoft has announced that its newest operating system, Windows 10, will arrive on PCs on July 29th. And yet they've already kind of like botched the launch. So on all personal Windows,
almost all.
Well, yeah, I actually am among those that have not received this, but on almost all personal Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 PCs that are fully up to date and have all your Windows updates, Microsoft has placed a small Windows flag in the system tray. It looks like the little Windows logo, and it'll allow users to reserve a copy of Windows 10 prior to its release. And yet, some people feel like it's a virus. And they're like, "Wait, what is this? I didn't install this. Where did this come from?" And the other problem is that it was part of it was kind of tucked into an update pack that came out in March as an optional pack for updates to the notification center, and that is what it installed as part of that update pack. Now, all that being said, Microsoft's Windows 10 update will cache on your PC. This is a theory, I'm sure, similar to how console digital download pre-orders do. So that way, on release day, you're not downloading 3 gigs of Windows. Everyone's not downloading 3 gigs of Windows, so you don't have that problem of it just doesn't work. However, we don't know a lot of things, lots of things. Like Enterprise, don't even ask. No one knows the answer. OEM, nope. We don't know when that comes out either. RTM, yeah, we don't know when that is either.
Well, we know. Okay, we have a release date, so it's going to RTM sometime between now and July 29th. I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about the RTM date. There's a fixed deadline for when it's going to RTM.
Well, and Microsoft has said that there will be
some
hundreds
amount of time before the 29th.
And they said there's going to be hundreds of devices running Windows 10 at Windows 10 launch. Mm-hmm. So when can we expect that hardware? Actually, though, because remember, tablets also can now run, and Intel compute sticks and all kinds of little
Intel
things.
Compute sticks are just a PC.
Right? No, they're PCs. They're Atom processors. Anything with an Atom processor can now run it. And there's lots of hardware that's being kind of slated to attack that low-end tablet market with Windows 10. Mm-hmm, but we don't know when we're going to get it. Asus just showed off a bunch of new stuff.
Look, we know when we're going to
we don't know when we're going to get any of it.
Well, sure, but that's on the OEMs, not on Microsoft, and it behooves all of the OEMs in that space to make it for back to school. So right. I bet pretty close to launch.
And then when can I get my Surface Pro 4? These are all the questions that we have. Trey, Surface Pro 4. When do I get it?
The Surface Pro 4, I don't know. Right? maybe you'll get at the Windows 10 launch event, you will get details in the Surface Pro 4. And I guess at this point they're targeting holiday and not back to school. That's all I can tell you at this
Because
point.
we probably would have heard something at this
Right.
point.
Right. So maybe it will launch alongside HoloLens sometime this fall. Or maybe there won't be, or maybe there just won't be a Surface Pro 4 this year.
Or maybe they'll just do like what they did with Surface 3 and just release it as a press release.
Let's go. Here it is.
And oh look, here's a Surface 3. No, whatever.
Not everything needs a Steve Jobs style press event.
I think Satya is trying to move away from that.
Oh, I don't know. I think Satya's trying to use them strategically.
Right. Well, trying not to do them for everything.
Yeah, but Surface Pro 4 is like
That's a big.
I think they miss something if they don't. Because the big presser for Surface Pro 3 really got people excited. It really made a difference. They really rolled out the Dog of Pony show, and I think it's part of what set the tone for this device, that this device is a big deal. So I think they lose something if they don't do it for the Surface Pro 4. So kind of back to the
So what do we
actual
think of
story.
the flag? You want to talk about the flag?
It's real stupid. It's really stupid. Paul Thurrott, who I respect a lot, had an interesting take on this, and I think he's right. That normally, we're surprised at this, because normally Microsoft does a slightly better job than most of the tech companies of respecting your privacy, respecting your device, not getting in the way. Apple, apps on iOS and Android update constantly without you ever knowing or giving permission to do it. Windows doesn't work that way.
You give permission when you install it. There's a checkbox
Yeah, I get that.
that no one unchecks.
No one unchecks. And there's no reason to. But they're constantly messing with this thing on your computer without you knowing about it. Windows, details every change it makes and makes you manually restart and all of these things, or warns you when updates are about to install, and you can go in and theoretically get rid of all of them if you wanted to.
Say, no, I don't want to do that.
No, I don't want to do that. And you can do that. And so this, Apple does this with every new edition of iOS that happens. And every new edition of OS X that happens. You get a flag that pops up and says, hey, the new edition of this thing's out. Do you want it? And so everyone else already does this. But yet we react so viscerally because this isn't like Microsoft. Because this is, this is adware, actually, is what it is. This is a piece of adware.
Because they're trying to sell you on moving to their device.
They're advertising their new thing. No money change hands. It's not truly nefarious. It's stupid. It's, I think Windows 10 is going to be a meaningful upgrade for people. I think people should download it.
I agree with that as the person currently using the technical preview.
I don't have a problem with Windows 10. I'm a relatively decent fan of what Microsoft is doing these days. This just seems like a really unnecessary blunder that looks a lot like a virus. In some ways it is. You got software you didn't want and that you didn't really know what you were getting.
It's like a U2 album,
Yeah, it's like that time. And Apple took lumps for it and had to delete it. It's not like Apple got away with it either. But Apple gets away with this, hey, you should upgrade. Hey, you should upgrade. My pokey MacBook Air that's been converted into a baby monitor periodically gets, you should upgrade to Yosemite. And I go, no.
You look at it, you're like, that's a terrible idea.
4-year-old MacBook Air is not, nope. We're not going to do that. I'm sorry. This, Core 2 Duo thing is just not gonna. Low power Core 2 Duo. It wasn't running great to start.
Yeah,
with.
no.
I'm excited about Windows 10. Just why you do these things, Microsoft.
So what I can't figure out is why I can't get the stupid flag to show up on my PC.
Are you running the Windows 10 beta?
No, not on this PC. On my laptop.
Yeah, I don't know about that. And there's some people who can't see it, and there's some people you can actually go in and delete either the registry.
You can remove it,
or the specific update. Go to Thurrott.com if you want to find out how to do that. Or there's other places on the internet that can tell you.
Also, you can just hide it. There's a way to hide it from the system.
It only takes up It takes up 4 megs of memory, so you're not losing. Again, it's not that big a deal. But at the same time, it's just kind of stupid. Yeah.
And they've managed to get the the story is not, oh hey look, Windows 10's release date. It's, hey, what's this stupid Windows flag thing?
And the
And why
truth
can't I
is
get
that
it to go away?
And the truth is the story should be, hey, Windows 10 has a release date, and it's the one we thought it was. Like, that should be
Yeah.
the story.
The story is, oh yeah, guess what? When they leaked that way back when, AMD accidentally said, oh
AMD
yeah,
accidentally-
it's coming out.
Right. And Windows 10 is in some ways a remarkable blend of what they got right with Windows 8 and what they got right with Windows 7 and throwing out what they did wrong with Windows 8. I mean, it's like this could be a net positive for Microsoft. And so far, up until this point, like the beta has had a lot of participation. You get the sense that they're trying to be real open. This isn't the Sinofsky era where they're just saying, this is what you're going to get and you're going to like it. And then they do this. And it just totally changes the story to one of, oh, Microsoft, why do you keep doing these things? And the tech journalists who all use MacBook Airs and have no idea that there's a wider world out there go, oh, Microsoft, that stupid, irrelevant company that has like 1 billion users. But like, let's ignore that for a second.
Yeah, or
Those aren't the
whatever.
users any of them care about. Oh, they're so stupid. They can't do anything right.
Microsoft always says when they announce services. I liked last time, as I look out at a sea of MacBook.
Well, they've turned it into a joke, right?
They really have.
And it drives me crazy when I read, the coverage of,
But-
the Surface isn't like an iPad. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
Better.
God. So yeah, I think Microsoft, this isn't all that bad. I think just Microsoft shot themselves in the foot, and I wish they wouldn't do things like that.
Yeah, they don't need any help.
They don't need any help, and people don't need any help fearing their computers or thinking Windows is slightly too complicated. And, I can even get the logic of why they did that, because I think it is so they can trickle out the updates over time, and so it'll be ready, cached on your computer, and then you can just install, and so it's not 1 billion people hitting their servers at the same time, and then everyone going silent like the blowing up of Alderaan, right? That's what they're trying to avoid, that Microsoft... That,
1 billion voices called out.
and then suddenly go
once.
silent because the damn servers crash. I mean, this is what we're trying to prevent, is an Alderaan-level disaster of downloads. I get the logic. I really do.
I just want my ISO. I want a clean install. I'm going to blow this computer
and that's
away.
not clear how you're going to get that either. Actually, okay, here's
They
what you
will
could-
eventually just upload. No, this is the
Yeah,
reality
it took
of
how
it
many
is.
years for that to happen for Windows 8?
I got an ISO for Windows 8 when I installed originally.
Right. Here's how you're going to be able to do it. Do the upgrade process, install it, and then create an ISO. And that'll work fine, and that's always worked. So you'll be able to blow it away. There's just one extra step. Because an ISO of Windows 7 is not 3 gig download.
Nope. 15.
Right. Exactly. So, now for something completely different. Pew Research published a study this week about how different generations get their political news. It looked at around 3,000 respondents, which is a really good sample size, from their kind of representative sample of people on the internet. And this is Pew Research, so don't sit here and pick apart methodologies.
This is
That's
Pew Research. They do
Pew
this.
Research. They do research, and they're reliable. So let's assume that this is a pretty reliable sample. Again, skewed for people who are on the internet. So that's the inherent bias. Anyways, they divided this group into three generations. Millennials, those 18 to 33, which is a little older than I usually skew millennials. Gen Xers, 34 to 49, which again, I would start Gen Xers earlier than that. But anyways, no one asked me. And then baby boomers, age 50 to 68, which I think is pretty accurate. Of these groups, millennials were remarkable for how much political news they get from Facebook. Now, don't mishear this. 61% of millennials say that they get political news from Facebook
In the last week.
in the last week, compared to 51% of Gen Xers and 39% of boomers. Now, not enough is being made of that 39% of boomers.
That's
aged
really high.
50 to 68, who are getting at least some political news from Facebook in the last week.
No.
Okay?
More than a third
More than
of
a
them are getting political news from Facebook in the last
So,
week.
you know, I don't think that's getting enough play. Anyways, on the flip side, 60% of boomers say that they get news from local news compared to 37% of millennials who get news from local news, which I also think is remarkably high given how seldom I watch local news.
So I think that people, well, this is something that I've only become aware of recently. People turn on the news in the morning when they're getting ready as noise.
Sure. I have tech podcasts for that, but sure, I get it. However, this gets a little stranger. Some form of TV news, CNN, Fox, is the most common source for people to report as their main source of political news across all the generations. Gen Xers and millennials, the top ranked source for where they get the majority of their news was CNN, and then all these different TV sources. Boomers, not all that surprisingly, fixed noise. I mean, Fox News was the number one kind of place where people were viewed as their main source. Only 3% of millennials said that Facebook was their main source for political news. So while 61% say they get some political information, some political news from Facebook, only 3% are saying that's their main source of political news. And as ever, young people are less interested in politics than older people. That's not, if anyone tells you that's a headline, it's not. That's been going on since time immemorial. Except when the young people try to overthrow the government, which happens only rarely. Anyways.
And hopefully it doesn't happen in the near future.
The barricade. Finally, millennials were more likely to see political things that they disagreed with on their news feeds than older folks.
As compared to baby boomers.
Oh, and no one uses Twitter. What do you think of all this? I mean, literally, this is like, there's just this footnote at the end of the Facebook page on the Pew Research today is like, and Twitter, no one really uses it. Take that, Technorati.
I mean,
no one does.
Basically, the Twitter confirms that, Twitter is really just like drinking from a fire hose at some point.
So I use Twitter the ways I used AP wires in college, in that I get the AP wires in my Twitter feed.
Yeah, I mean,
I get a lot of my news from Twitter, and then I get a lot of my news from the Associated Press and CNN fed through my Twitter feed, viewed on Flipboard. Anyways, what do you make of all of this?
So I think you're right. I one of the more interesting things for me is the skewed how high baby boomers age 50 to 68, how 39% of them get some political information from Facebook in the last week.
In the last week. I mean, this isn't like, oh, I once saw a thing. This is recently.
Yeah,
again,
this is
okay, but let's be clear here. The bias comes in, right? This is 39% of boomers who were using the internet.
Right.
So that's key.
Right.
Because I don't think 100, whereas I think close to 100% of millennials and pretty close to 100% of Gen Xers are online. I do not think close to 100% of boomers are on the internet. So again, that's an important number to think about and it kind of matches my own experience. I have a lot of boomers in my Facebook feed. Part of it is I'm a pastor, and so that comes up. But I have a lot of boomers in my feed. I see it. I see a lot more boomers than you would expect on Facebook.
Yeah, no, and I see a lot of boomers on Facebook as well. But I think that another thing that would be interesting for millennials would be to see the distribution across the millennials for, okay, is there any statistical significance to what 18-year-olds said versus what the 33-year-olds said across the gradient? Because my suspicion would be that, and some of this is because 18-year-olds are, either in college or, about to go to college.
Or all weirdos.
Yes.
Weirdos.
They are all weirdos too. My suspicion would be that they would be higher for engagement on social media, where those in their early 30s would be a little bit lower, closer to maybe that 50% from the Gen Xers.
Yeah,
so
but at some point, your buckets just get too small.
Yeah, no, you couldn't parse that data out of this study. There's not enough participants.
Oh, actually, there are, right? I mean, if you figure it's 3,000, you reckon that's close to 1,000 per generation. I mean, you could do
Yeah,
it,
you could probably do it.
which you would still probably have to do it in batches. You probably don't have enough to do a regression per individual
Yeah,
age.
no, you could still bin it though,
But
as
you
long
could
as
bin
you.
it by 5-year increments
Yeah.
rather than 18-year increments, and probably maintain some sense of statistical coherency.
Yeah, as long as you can get the bins to be large enough, I would just be interested to see if that's a continuous thing or if it's like, because what I'm really curious to see is whether or not this number keeps going, like those that are engaging through local media sources keeps going down, and those that are engaging on something like Facebook keeps going up, because all the reports that we keep hearing about the youngins these days is that they don't want to be on Facebook.
Right. Or that
Is that
they have Facebook as a way to engage with older relatives.
that Facebook to them, because none of them have experienced the Facebook when their parents weren't on it.
Right, but I wonder if that is the dynamics of the next generation that doesn't have a name yet. Right?
Right. Well, and that's
Whatever
I'm
these
curious if we can see that going that way, or if there's something where because somehow they will have to consume actual media,
Maybe?
probably,
I mean,
because
but keep in mind, like,
but they're all about
Instagram-
instantaneous.
But Instagram and Snapchat have their own content creation things, and you can get snaps. God, why do I know this? You can get snap stories from major events.
I did know that.
So that might be that next thing. Is it's not you're getting on Facebook. It's someday there's going to be a bin that says how much news do you get via Snap Story, how much news do you get via Periscope. Although I think Periscope's just a technorati thing, like Twitter. No one uses Periscope. I think is where this is. Periscope, a Twitter company. No
Periscope,
one uses it.
a Twitter company, no one uses it.
You know, it was the breakout thing at South by Southwest, which is a really key way to say none of the kids are using it.
Yep.
Which is what I love.
All
love
the
about this
30-year-old tech journalists were going crazy over it.
Oh, they're going nuts with their, Timbuktu shoulder bags and their Google Glass and their
Yeah, they're still stuck in the like early to mid 2000s.
no, and they're stuck in some cyberpunk ridiculousness. Like, I used to think we should go to South by Southwest Interactive. I really did. You're relatively close, and I'm fixing to be relatively close. But the more I look at that and the products that come out of that, those are just the things that tend to stay in the tech inner circle.
And never move outside of
Or
it.
not
I don't.
that far, right? Twitter has moved outside the tech inner circle, but if this Pew Research tells us anything, is normal people don't use Twitter. Periscope, GroupMe, Foursquare, these are all the breakout products of South by. And they're all super, like, Sergey Brin running the world kind of products.
Yep.
So, anyways. For me, the most interesting thing here of all of this is 3% of millennials view Facebook as their main political news source. 20% view CNN.
Yeah, see, but that's because I think that they just when I'm engaging with news on Facebook, because I would probably answer yes to this, that I've engaged with political news on Facebook in the last week. I don't think of it.
Depends how broadly you define. 21% of millennials.
So I don't.
CNN is their main news source.
I don't think of it as I'm engaging with Facebook. I think of it as Facebook has found this CNN article or this New York Times article or
I think
whatever
you
it
bring up
might
an
be.
excellent point that in some ways this question misunderstands how Facebook works.
Because I'll scroll through my feed and I'll see something that someone has posted and I'll read the source right at the bottom before I click on it and I go, yeah, no, I'm not reading that.
Sure.
I look at it and go, that's garbage.
I read a political article right before we went on about the Duggars because that's top of my.
Did you read about that interview?
Oh yeah, that's what I was reading about.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's a mess.
That show's over.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what all this means. Pew doesn't really know what this all means. I think
Right now it's just interesting data.
and I think it's obvious and shouldn't be shocking that something that is essentially lets people post articles that they're interested in ends up as a news source for people. Right? That shouldn't be
Well,
surprising.
and the fact that Facebook is very
It's like bulletin
sticky.
boards in the 1980s.
The fact that Facebook is very sticky, that people go to Facebook and then like to stay there. And this is part of Facebook's push that we reported on like 3 weeks ago, where like the New York Times will now just be kind of hosted within Facebook.
Yeah. Well, not the only place the New York Times is going to be hosted, but
Right.
they are going to be hosting native content within Facebook. Isn't
So
that a
that-
brilliant idea?
So they get better load times. Because guess what? I engage with New York Times content that's posted on Facebook.
Right. And if it loaded faster and I didn't run into the paywalls often, that's great. So something else that is pretty great is
Or
this
pretty bad.
pretty bad, depending on whose perspective, is this week's last call.
So we've all either seen or participated in computer recycling drives before.
I do.
You know, people bring old and obsolete computers and recycle them. I particularly remember my dad taking a hammer to the hard drive of a 1995 Gateway before he recycled it, just to make sure that no one could use it. I think he took a Sawzall to it too. It was pretty impressive. However, at a Silicon Valley recycling center, luckily this woman did not take a Sawzall to what she recycled because, among other things, she recycled an original Apple I PC, one of only
Assembled
two.
by the Steves.
Yes, one of only 200 that were assembled by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. The PC was buried in a box with some other stuff that apparently came from the woman's garage after her husband had passed away. It was some stuff that he had accumulated over the years. The recycling firm, a couple weeks later, realized what they had, and they sold it to a private collector for a cool $200,000. But they're trying to find the woman to split the sale with her. See, what happened was the woman came and brought her stuff as recycling, and they said, "Oh, do you want a receipt?" And she said, "Oh, no, it's fine. You can keep it. It's, whatever." So they have no information on the woman that came and brought them this Apple One. So Trey, do you wish that you could be this lucky
Sure.
to be the guy
yeah.
that was like, "Oh my God, there's an Apple One in this box"?
I know what that is. I go to a lot of, thrift stores and flea markets.
Flea markets.
Spend entirely too much time there, and so much of what's there is garbage, but every once in a while you find really cool stuff, and I think this is kind of the ultimate version of that. And as I understand it, there was actually the deal that this electronics recycling place had is that they made money off of the thing. They would that this 50-50 split thing is part of their deal. And yeah, they sold
okay.
it. I can't remember where.
Here, I've got one of the articles.
But as I understand it, that was just kind of the deal. That was their deal. So it's people have been like, "Oh, why
Yeah.
did they do that? Why did they?"
And
sell it so
because the
quick?"
company gives 50% of items sold back to the original owner,
Right.
he wants to split the proceeds with the mystery donor.
Now, what they could have done, if they wanted to be really nice, is before they sold it, try to contact her. But again, in the end, it was legally in their possession. They did what they were within their rights to do, and they're trying to honor their deal and offer this woman $100,000. Whereas she was, willing to take nothing for it and throw it away.
She kind of was just like, "This is all junk, so if you can get anything from it, more power to you."
We're lucky this thing didn't end up in the landfill.
I'm for one, I'm glad that this woman took it to a place that would try to evaluate what they had
Yeah, no joke.
rather than just.
I think
I mean,
my
you
local
walk
Goodwill
in
would
and
have
you just
just sold it.
you see stacks of printers and
Yeah.
electronic typewriters and all kinds of random stuff
And rock band guitars. Lots of rock band guitars.
because they eventually just wear out.
Yeah, I junked one just today.
So
Anyways, we should probably get out of here. Thank you so much for joining us in this week's Text Last Call. If you have any feedback for the show, podcast, or have mystery electronics you want to give us,
we will take
podcast at
interesting
textlastcall.com.
things.
Facebook.com/textlastcall, Pinterest.com/textlastcall, or at textlastcall on the Twitters. However you find us, be seeing you on the interwebs.